I'm Lauren Parker, 29, and the youngest in my family. For years, I held on to the hope they'd finally see me as capable. But even on graduation day, nothing changed. My dad told me not to expect help, not to count on anyone. What happened after that made the entire hall go silent. The air smelled like cut grass and faint sunscreen, the kind of scent that clings to every graduation in late May. Rows of families filled the stadium bleachers, fanning themselves with programs, snapping photos, and calling out to graduates crossing the stage. I spotted my parents in the VIP section, a neat row of dark suits and pastel dresses. Richard Parker. My father sat tall in his navy jacket, his gold cufflinks catching the light each time he adjusted his sleeve. Beside him, my mother Margaret had her sunglasses perched on top of her hair, a polite half-smile fixed to her face. Daniel, my older brother, leaned toward her, saying something that made her laugh. None of them waved. I tightened my grip on the folder holding my cap and adjusted my tassel, forcing my eyes back to the program. Somewhere beneath the paper in the small pocket of my purse, I could feel the weight of a gold pen. My grandfather had handed it to me on my 16th birthday with the words, "One day you'll sign something important with this." I doubted anyone else in my family even remembered that. The sun pressed warm on the crown of my head as the announcer's voice boomed another name. My phone vibrated in my lap. 3 words from Dad lit up the screen. "Let's be clear." I swiped, scanning the rest of the message before I could stop myself. "The business will never be yours. Focus on finding your own path." For a moment, the sound of applause blurred into a single dull hum. I locked the screen and slipped the phone back into my lap. 2 rows down, Daniel was already on his feet, waiting for his turn to be called. When his name echoed across the stadium, the applause from the Parker section was loud enough to cut through everything else. I clapped, because that's what you do. The tassel brushed my cheek. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't look. When the cheering for Daniel died down, I caught my mother leaning toward a woman behind her, her voice carrying just enough for me to catch the edge of it. "She's not cut out for leadership," she said, tilting her head in my direction. "Numbers on paper aren't the same as running a real company." The words slid in cold, but I kept my face still, eyes fixed on the stage. A seagull circled above the scoreboard, its wings flashing white in the sunlight. The announcer called another name. My phone again vibrating in my lap, this time a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring until it stopped. The wind shifted, rustling the banners overhead. I stood when my row was signaled, the gold pen shifting against the fabric inside my purse. The camera shutters clicked in a quick staccato burst somewhere to my left. My name wasn't yet called, but the walk toward the stage felt inevitable. I kept my eyes forward, the murmur of the crowd blending with the measured thump of my own footsteps. Somewhere behind me, my phone started to buzz again. I didn't turn around, not yet. The line of graduates shifted forward a few steps, gowns brushing like soft waves along the aisle. A volunteer in a blazer pointed us toward the left ramp, reminding us to have our name cards ready. I slid mine free and felt the corner catch on the lining of my sleeve. The gold pen nudged against my wrist bones, steady, familiar. From the field, I could see my family more clearly. My father's attention was fixed on the stage the way he watches quarterly results alert measuring. My mother adjusted her sunglasses and smoothed the front of her dress, then checked the time. Daniel was already back in his seat, shoulders relaxed, his program folded into a neat fan he tapped against his knee. He said something that made our mother laugh again. It was the polite kind of laugh you make when the outcome is already decided. The announcer's cadence never changed, name, degree, department applause. A gust lifted the edge of the Wharton banner and dropped it again with a soft thump. The smell of hot plastic from the temporary seating mingled with grass and sunscreen. A baby fussed behind me. Somewhere a whistle blew and stopped. I felt my phone buzz once more, hesitated, and turned it face down in my palm. The unknown number had left a voicemail. I didn't press play. Ahead, a classmate held out her name card with shaky fingers. "Butterflies," I whispered, mostly to give her something to do besides worry. She smiled without looking up. "My parents rented a billboard," she said. "Hard to live up to a billboard. My family prefers memos," I said. She didn't ask what that meant, and I didn't offer. We moved again. The sunlight slid lower, catching on 1,000 tiny metal edges, pins, watches, ring settings. I thought about the pitch deck I'd torn apart last week, the late nights with coffee gone cold, the way good numbers settle like a level surface when you stop forcing them. The phone vibrated, then stilled. I tucked it beneath the folded edge of my gown. A student marshal lifted a hand. Next row. We stepped forward into the shade of the stage awning. The temperature dropped a few degrees, the light flattening into a calmer gray. Up close, the scuffed metal of the ramp showed faint lines where so many shoes had climbed this path before. The dean shook hands with a rhythm so practiced it looked like choreography. 2 more names. The speakers crackled. My row partner swallowed hard. I squared my shoulders and slid the name card to the front of my fingers. In the stands, my father leaned in to say something to my mother. She nodded, his jaw set. Even from here, I knew that look decisions made without a second vote. The volunteer at the base of the ramp gave me a small nod. Almost there, she said, eyes kind the way a nurse speaks before a needle. I nodded back. My phone hummed again, a shorter vibration, another voicemail. I exhaled slowly through my nose and let the breath go. The tassel brushed my cheek again, ticklish and light. Behind the stage curtain, a stack of diploma covers waited like identical briefcases. A staffer straightened one corner and then another, lining them with the edge of the table until they were perfectly square. I found the rhythm of that movement and matched my breath to it. A line, release, a line, release. A camera crew walked along the sideline catching candids. The lens swept past our section and paused a beat too long on my father's face. He didn't notice. My mother saw the camera and lifted her chin. Daniel knew where the lens was without looking. He turned just enough to be in frame. Next, the stage manager said, motioning. I stepped to the tape mark. The microphone popped once. The dean glanced at the card in his hand, then up at me, then back to the card. The corners of his mouth lifted in a polite, administrative way. I felt the weight of the gold pen settle in my purse like a small anchor. Somewhere to my right, a gull cried and was gone. My phone one last insistent nudge against my palm, then silence. I rolled my shoulders once, as if settling into a blazer, and let my fingers relax. The edge of the stage gleamed. I could see the first step clearly, the slight dip where countless heels had pressed it down. I lifted my chin and waited for the dean to speak. The dean's voice carried evenly through the speakers, his diction measured. My name floated out into the stadium, settling briefly before the applause began, polite, even unremarkable. I stepped forward, feeling the scuffed texture of the ramp under my shoes. The moment I emerged into full view, I scanned the crowd without meaning to. My father's hands were clasped, unmoving. My mother offered a small smile, automatic, the kind you give to someone else's child. Daniel's arms were folded loosely, his gaze already drifting back to the program on his lap. They had been so certain this day was ceremonial, only a box to tick before the real work returned to him. The dean handed me the diploma cover. I shook his hand and held his gaze for a half-second longer than protocol required. Not defiance, just enough time to register that I was present, steady and unshaken. The camera's shutter clicked in quick succession. Walking down the far ramp, the afternoon air wrapped warm around me again. The sun flashed off the brass fittings of the temporary rail, catching me in the eyes for a moment. My phone, still in my hand, felt heavier now. I didn't look at it yet. I wanted this small stretch of steps and grass to be mine alone. Students I barely knew called my name, tossing mock salutes or raising their caps. I answered each with a nod or a brief smile. The band struck up a light march, its tempo bouncing off the metal risers. Somewhere behind me, the dean's voice began again, already onto the next graduate. At the base of the seating, I slipped into the aisle between the folding chairs. My family's row was 10 seats down. They didn't see me approach. They were watching Daniel's department line forming in the distance. I stopped just shy of their row, choosing the seat at the very end, close enough to be counted, far enough to be apart. The chair was warm from the sun, the metal edges pressing lightly into the backs of my legs through the gown. I placed the diploma cover on my lap, one hand resting on its smooth surface. The gold pen sat beside it like punctuation at the end of an unfinished sentence. My phone remained face down. The screen stayed black, holding back whatever message it carried. From here I could hear my father's voice, low and certain, as he spoke to my mother about schedules, budgets, and next steps. Daniel leaned in when he spoke, the three of them forming that familiar closed triangle. I let the moment settle around me without pressing into it. The weight of the sun, the smell of warm grass, the distant cheer for another name. My fingers curled slightly against the pen. Whatever waited in those voicemails could wait a few minutes longer. I shifted my gaze toward the stage, just in time to see the next graduate step forward. My applause was measured, the sound merging with 1,000 others, indistinguishable yet undeniably there. 2 days after graduation, the campus felt like it had exhaled and emptied. The lawns were patchy with folding chair imprints, and the banners still clung half-heartedly to the lampposts. I was back in town not for nostalgia, but because my father had insisted on a family meeting at the office. His words, not mine. The Parker & Sons building sat squat and confident in the middle of Main Street, its brickwork spotless, the gold lettering on the front polished until it caught every ray of sunlight. I'd walked through those glass doors more times as a kid than I could count, always holding Mom's hand, watching Dad shake hands with men in tailored suits, listening to the muted hum of the accounting floor. Today my steps echoed too loud against the marble floor. Daniel was already leaning against the reception desk when I walked in, sleeves rolled up in that casual but in-charge way he'd perfected. He greeted me with a nod, no smile, his phone still in his hand. "Dad's upstairs," he said, like he was delivering a line from a script. The meeting room smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish. Dad sat at the head of the table, flipping through a stack of reports. Mom was beside him, tapping her nails lightly against a legal pad, eyes skimming the agenda. "Lauren," Dad said without looking up, "take a seat." I sat 2 chairs down from him, the gap intentional. The surface of the table was cold under my palms. He cleared his throat. "We need to be clear about responsibilities going forward. The company's growth requires stability. Daniel has been handling operations flawlessly. With the IPO talks in motion, we can't afford distractions." His eyes finally met mine, the pause sharp enough to leave a mark. Mom added, "It's important everyone understands their role. You've built interesting projects, Lauren, but the board isn't looking for experiments. We need predictable returns." Her tone was almost kind, but the choice of words was surgical. Daniel leaned forward, sliding a folder across the table toward Dad. "I've already started drafting the next quarter's plan," he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, "Maybe Lauren can help with some of the community events. Keep her involved." The suggestion landed with the soft weight of dismissal. I glanced at the folder but didn't touch it. Instead, I said, "Community events are important. But I have other commitments now." My voice stayed even, each word steady. Dad didn't respond right away. He made a note in the margin of his paper, then said, "We'll revisit this after the IPO." It wasn't a conversation. It was a full stop. When the meeting adjourned, Daniel caught my arm lightly in the hallway. "Don't take it personally," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been pity. "Dad just wants what's best for the company." I pulled my arm back, the motion small enough not to draw attention but deliberate enough that he noticed. "I'm sure he does," I replied, then walked past him toward the elevator. Outside, the sunlight felt different, brighter but sharp. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, watching the town traffic drift by. A delivery truck idled at the curb, its driver tossing me a polite wave before climbing back in. I started walking not toward my car, but down the block past the bakery that still smelled like cinnamon and yeast, past the bookstore with the sun-faded summer reads display. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't check it right away. At the corner, I paused under the shade of an awning. I could see the Parker & Sons sign reflected in the glass of the cafe across the street, reversed but unmistakable. I took out my phone and glanced at the screen. One missed call from a number I recognized immediately, one I'd been expecting for weeks, though I hadn't told a soul. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without answering. Not yet. Timing mattered, and for now, silence was still my sharpest tool. 2 mornings later, I found myself in the corner booth of Bailey's Cafe, the same spot I'd claimed through countless late-night study sessions in college. The hum of conversation blended with the hiss of the espresso machine, a background score I barely heard. My laptop was open, spreadsheets and pitch decks filling the screen. I wasn't here for nostalgia, I was here to work. This was the side of my life my family didn't see, the one that had been growing quietly, almost invisibly, under the noise of their disapproval. My startup had started as a side project in their eyes, something to keep me busy. They never asked why my light was still on at 2 in the morning or why I skipped weekend plans. Across the street, the Parker & Sons building loomed visible through the cafe window. From here it looked almost ornamental, like it belonged in a framed photograph. I could picture Daniel walking through the glass doors right now, greeting employees with that easy confidence. I didn't envy him. I just knew our paths were diverging faster than anyone realized. Midway through reviewing a supplier contract, the door chimed and Megan slipped inside, brushing the rain from her jacket. She spotted me and smiled wide, unguarded. Megan had been with me since the early days, back when we were both balancing part-time jobs and brainstorming over instant noodles. "You're early," she said, setting her coffee down and sliding into the seat across from me. "Old habits," I replied. She leaned forward, voice lowering. "We got the green light from the second investor. It's official, the IPO paperwork can be filed." Her eyes sparkled the way they did when something big was on the horizon. I felt the corner of my mouth curve, but I kept my voice even. "Good. That means we're right on schedule." Megan shook her head, half laughing. "You're impossible to rattle. Do you realize what this means? They'll find out soon enough?" I didn't answer immediately. My gaze drifted back to the Parker & Sons building, its gold lettering catching a streak of morning light. "Timing," I said finally. "We stick to it." The cafe door opened again, letting in a gust of wind and 2 familiar voices. Mom and Daniel. I sank slightly into my seat, not to hide, but to avoid becoming part of their morning. They walked past without noticing me, heading toward the counter. Mom's tone was brisk. Daniel's a shade louder than necessary, as if making sure everyone knew he was the man in charge. Megan followed my gaze. "You want me to—" "No." I interrupted, my tone soft but firm. Let them have their moment. They didn't linger. After ordering, they left as quickly as they'd come, stepping back into the drizzle. When the door closed, Megan exhaled. "You really don't want to tell them yet?" I closed my laptop, sliding it into my bag. They've already written my ending. I'd rather they hear the real one when the whole room is listening. We left the cafe together, parting ways at the crosswalk. My shoes splashed lightly against the wet pavement, each step measured. I wasn't rushing. Not yet. By the time I reached my apartment, the rain had slowed to a mist. I unlocked the door, the familiar scent of coffee beans and cedar greeting me. On the counter sat a sealed envelope with the Parker & Sons logo in the corner, delivered by hand, judging by the lack of postage. I opened it slowly. Inside was an invitation to a private family dinner scheduled for the evening before the IPO announcement. No RSVP required. The private family dinner wasn't a new tactic. Over the years, it had been their way of tightening control, soft lighting expensive wine and conversations that felt like negotiations disguised as affection. This time, though, the timing was strategic. The day before the IPO announcement wasn't coincidence. It was a stage they were setting, and they expected me to play the role they'd written for me. I spent the next few days working in silence, keeping the IPO timeline locked between myself, Megan, and our legal team. The news was moving like an underground current, unseen but powerful enough to change the shoreline when it finally broke. On the afternoon of the dinner, I stopped by the office one last time. Our conference table was buried under mock-ups, marketing packets, and press release drafts. Megan handed me a folder. "If they push you tonight, you'll want these numbers. Not to use, just to remember you have them." I slipped the folder into my bag without looking. "I'm not going there to defend myself. I'm going to listen." The restaurant they'd chosen was one of those places with starched tablecloths and staff who remembered your drink order from years ago. The hostess led me to a private room in the back where my family was already seated. Mom gave me the same polite smile she reserved for distant acquaintances. Dad, who rarely appeared at these things, sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Daniel, as usual, filled the silence with his voice. "Lauren," Mom said, gesturing to the empty seat at the far end. Not next to her, not next to Dad. I took it without comment, folding my napkin across my lap. Dinner started with harmless small talk, weather, travel plans, a charity gala I hadn't been invited to. But soon the questions sharpened, wrapped in casual tones. So Dad began leaning back in his chair. "What have you been doing with yourself lately?" "Still tinkering with that little project." I met his gaze, letting the pause stretch just enough. "It's keeping me busy." Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, if you ever decide you're ready for real work, you know where the family business is." The words slid across the table like a challenge. I didn't take it. Instead, I reached for my water, the glass cool against my hand. As the main course arrived, Mom steered the conversation toward the company's upcoming fiscal year. They spoke about expansion plans, new hires, and boardroom politics as if I weren't there. I let them. Halfway through dessert, Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "You should be careful who you align with, Lauren. Without the right backing people like you, well, they get left behind." Megan's words from earlier echoed in my mind. They had no idea. I set my fork down, the sound small but crisp in the quiet room. "Noted," I said simply. The check arrived without anyone asking if we should split it. As we stood, Mom touched my arm lightly, her nails cold against my skin. "We're only looking out for you," she murmured. I smiled faintly, stepping back. "I know." Outside, the night air was cool, the street lamps casting long shadows. I walked toward my car, my pace unhurried. Tomorrow the current would break the surface. The morning of the IPO announcement was so still, it felt like the city was holding its breath. I woke before my alarm, the soft light of dawn spilling through my curtains, and checked my phone. No calls yet, no messages, just the quiet before a very public storm. By 8, I was in the office. Megan was already there, pacing with a coffee in hand, her phone buzzing on the desk. The press release is cued. She said, her voice steady but bright. "Once the bell rings, it's live." I nodded, slipping into my chair. The hum of the computers, the distant murmur from the trading floor, we were in the eye of it. At exactly 9:30, the alert popped up on my screen: IPO launched at $6 billion valuation. My phone vibrated immediately, then again and again. Reporters, investors, people I hadn't spoken to in years. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I glanced at the family group chat, silent until now. Then a message from Dad: "Call me." Now. I didn't. By noon, the story was everywhere. Financial news channels, morning talk, shows, even trending hashtags. Megan pulled me into the conference room where the glass walls gave a panoramic view of the skyline. "We have a situation," she said, tilting her head toward the door. And there they were. My parents and Daniel walking in like they belonged there. The receptionist trailed behind, looking apologetic. Lauren, Dad said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "We need to talk. Privately." I gestured to the seats. "We can talk here?" Daniel gave a sharp laugh. "This isn't how things are done." "Maybe not in your world," I replied, "but in mine transparency matters." Megan stayed in the room, leaning against the wall, silent but solid. Dad started with flattery, how proud they were, how impressive the valuation was. Then came the pivot: they could help guide the company, protect it from outsiders. All it would take was a controlling interest transferred to the family. I let them speak, my hands folded on the table. When they finally stopped, I slid a folder across to Dad. Inside were the legal documents confirming my sole ownership, the voting rights locked, and a board filled with people they couldn't sway. "This isn't yours to take," I said softly. For a moment, no one moved. Then Daniel's smile faltered. Dad's jaw tightened. Mom looked down at her hands. Through the glass wall, I saw staff slowing their pace, glancing in. They couldn't hear, but they could see. "I think we're done here," I said, standing. They left without another word, their exit as public as their arrival. When the door closed, Megan exhaled. "You didn't raise your voice once." I smiled faintly, gathering the folder. "Didn't need to." By evening, the office was quiet again. My phone still buzzed, but I let it go. Outside, the city lights blinked like they knew. Tomorrow, the headlines would move on. But today, the story was mine. I didn't go home right away that night. Instead, I wandered to the little cafe down the street, the same one I'd sat in months ago when my father's last message had told me I was on my own. Back then I'd stared at my coffee, wondering if they were right, if I really was incapable without their approval. Tonight, the same chair felt different. I ordered tea, not coffee, and let the steam curl toward my face. Through the window, I could see the faint reflection of the news ticker from the financial building across the street. Parker Tech IPO closes at record valuation. A couple at the next table whispered, glancing at their phones, then at me. I caught a few words, my name, and smiled politely. No one here knew the whole story, but the public part was enough. When I finally went home, the apartment felt like a sanctuary. I hung my coat, set my phone on silent, and sank into the couch. My laptop was still open from that morning. The company dashboard was a quiet green sea of numbers climbing higher. I thought about the path here, the nights alone in the office, the silent meals, the polite rejections that burned hotter than outright insults. I'd carried all of that without spectacle, without shouting, and now the people who once told me to step aside had walked out of my office without a single concession. The next day, a courier arrived with a bouquet. The card read, "Proud of you. Call when ready." Mom. I set it on the counter without a vase. Later that week at a networking dinner, someone asked me how I'd handled my family showing up uninvited at my biggest moment. I just said I let them see what they needed to see. No elaboration, no bitterness. Because that was the point, wasn't it? Silent power wasn't about erasing the hurt or pretending it hadn't happened. It was about letting the truth speak for itself without my voice drowning it out. As the evening wound down, I found myself looking out over the city again, the same skyline from my office but bathed in warmer light. Somewhere out there, my parents were deciding how to explain this to their friends. Maybe they'd rewrite the story in their favor. Maybe they wouldn't speak of it at all. Either way, I didn't need their version anymore. The one that mattered was already written, and this time, my name was on every page. A week later, the noise around the IPO had thinned into a steady hum. The headlines moved on to someone else's moment. Ours had settled into numbers and calendars, and the long, quiet work of building something that lasts. I came in early before the phone started and stood by the window with the city spread in gray-blue layers below. The office lights were still off. In the glass, my reflection looked almost like a stranger who had finally caught up to me. Michael Chen knocked on the doorframe with his knuckles, then stepped in. "Board call at 9, he said. "Press wants a follow-up at 11, and HR has the employee grant forms ready." He lifted a slim folder. "First round of stock options for the team." I opened the folder and skimmed the names: engineers who stayed past midnight, the office manager who never let invoices slip, the intern who found a bug no one else could catch. Each line meant someone else's future, tilting a little. I set the folder on the desk and reached into my purse. The gold pen lay there where it always had warm from my palm. 16-year-old me had imagined it as a key. It turned out to be something simpler, a point of contact between intention and paper. I uncapped it. The click felt final, like the last tile in a careful row. We signed the documents one by one. Michael lined pages along the edge of the desk, and I moved down the row: initials here, signature there, the pen gliding without pause. Outside the office, woke up shoes in the hallway, a laugh near the kitchen, the soft thud of mail in a bin. None of it broke the spell. It stitched it tighter. When I finished, Michael gathered the papers and hesitated. "There's one more thing," he said. He nodded toward the conference table. A small plaque rested there, still wrapped in tissue. I peeled the paper back. Lauren Parker, founder and CEO. Nothing flowery, just the truth in a clean serif. "Put it somewhere no one can miss," I said. He smiled. Already planned. By mid-morning, the office was a quiet orchestra. Heads bent, screens lit, the whiteboard filling. I stepped out to walk the floor. People glanced up and then back to their work, the best kind of acknowledgement, no fanfare, just steady trust. On Megan's desk, a postcard leaned against a mug, a photo of a coastline battered smooth by time. On the back, she'd written, "Keep going. The water carves the rock." Near noon, the elevator doors opened, and a familiar silhouette paused on the threshold. My father. No entourage, no announcement. He stood there for a beat, taking in the lobby, the glass, the low hum. For a second, I thought he might turn around and leave. He didn't. He walked to the reception desk, exchanged a few words I couldn't hear, and looked toward my office. I held his gaze across the length of the room. He lifted a hand in a small, uncertain half-wave, an olive branch the size of a breath. I met him halfway, not rushing. We stopped by the conference room where the plaque still sat. His eyes landed on it, then on the folder marked "Grants Executed." He exhaled the slightest shift in his shoulders. "Busy day," he said. "Most of them are?" I answered. Silence stretched, not hostile, not warm, just honest. He nodded toward the papers. "You did that?" "Yes." Another pause. Then he said, softer than I'd ever heard him, "Good." No speech. No rewrite. Just one syllable carefully placed. I didn't invite him in. He didn't ask. We let the space stand. After a moment, he glanced once more at the plaque, touched the edge of the conference table with his fingertips, like a man testing the grain, and turned back toward the elevators. The doors slid shut without a sound. Back in my office, the afternoon light cut a clean line across the desk. I capped the gold pen and set it beside the stack of forms. Messages pinged on my screen, lining up like small buoys on a dark surface. I answered what needed answering. I left what could wait. Before the next meeting, I stepped into the hallway and looked down at the floor through the glass, to the street where everything had begun for us, a small town, a tidy building, a door I once entered as a child with my mother's hand around mine. People were coming and going there too, pushing through the day, carrying their own invisible weights. I turned off the conference room light, the plaque catching the last stripe of sun. In the quiet that followed, you could hear almost nothing: the distant elevator bell, the faint rattle of air through the vent, the soft closing of a cabinet down the hall. I slid the pen back into my bag, closed the door behind me, and let the latch catch cleanly. No one needed to say anything. The room understood. Weeks later, I found the pen again at the bottom of my bag, its weight unchanged. I turned it in my fingers the way you might test a seashell for its edge, and set it back without opening it. Outside, the day moved at its usual pace, people crossing streets, doors swinging open and shut. I walked on unhurried, carrying only what I chose to keep.